by unlawful reporting of Russia on sovereign territories of Ukraine. This creates a precedent and compromising Paris Agreement enhanced transparency framework and global stocktake outcomes. This is absolutely transparency and reliability of global efforts on combating climate change. This must be resolved under the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Lars Agard Muller, Minister of Climate, Energy and Utility of Denmark. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in 2020, Denmark sets its 2030 target to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 70%. At the time, this seemed like an almost impossible task. We started with the lowest hanging fruits: rollout of renewable energy, wind, solar, biomethane, fast increase in e-mobility, energy efficiency, and CCS, tools that are available for most countries. But these tools, mostly in the energy sector, can only take us so far. We still have to cut additional emissions to reach our goal. We have to cut emissions from the agricultural sector. This summer, something amazing happened in Denmark. A somewhat odd group of people got together: farmers, trade unions, employers' organizations, a national NGO for nature conservation, and the government. Most often, such a group would not agree on climate and natural issues. But despite conflicting interests, we kept the conversation going, and we agreed to a deal. The group agreed on the biggest restructuring of the Danish landscape in recent time. We will convert farmland into forest at a massive scale, more nature. In order to walk the last mile towards the 70% reduction target, we had to break new ground. We have done this with the first in the world climate tax on agriculture. It helps us to cut the needed emissions. And we will do it with a focus on jobs and affordable food. With the backing of a broad coalition in our parliament on Monday, we reached a political agreement that brings a basis for the decision so we can bring it into life. We found a way, but we know it's not as easy as it sounds. One of the biggest challenges to climate action is polarization. We must take people's concerns seriously, because we can never let climate be either or. Nature versus farmers, the big cities versus rural communities, rich versus poor. It is possible to find constructive, innovative solutions, but it requires trust. This is what is at the very heart of just transition. We also build trust between countries here. Finance is key to that. We need a new goal on climate finance, an ambitious and achievable goal that paves the way for new NDCs and more climate action. The next round of NDCs is crucial, and we count on the G20 to take the lead. Denmark is also committed to being among the leaders in delivering on the new financial goal, but others must also follow. This includes countries that have evolved into high income and major emitters since 1992. Now allow me to share a few words on behalf of the Faroe Islands and Greenland. Climate change is threatening the Faroe Islands from the deep seas to the mountains. Global emissions must drop, and adaptation efforts need a boost to protect our onshore and marine ecosystem to ensure a sustainable future. Further west, the Inuit indigenous people of Greenland are vulnerable to climate change and experience some of the worst consequences. But Greenland is also a country of climate solutions with great renewable energy potential. Dedicated to fight climate change, I'm proud to have entered the Paris Agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Joe Emmanuel Abdullahi, Minister of Environment and Climate Change of Sierra Leone. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the government and people of Sierra Leone, I wish to express our deepest gratitude to the UNFCCC and the government of Azerbaijan for hosting this pivotal 29th Conference of Parties in Baku. We gather here at a critical juncture where our collective commitment to climate action must be stronger and more resolute than ever. Sierra Leone, like many other least developing countries, remains highly vulnerable to the devastating impacts of climate change. Our communities face threats of increasing climate variability, biodiversity loss, economic vulnerability, making urgent climate action and robust international support imperative. Sierra Leone has demonstrated unwavering commitments to global climate goals. We have made significant strides in advancing climate action through formulation of policies, community-based initiatives, and strategic partnerships. Our updated NDCs outline ambitious targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and strengthen our climate resilience. Central to our efforts is the prioritization of adaptation and mitigation strategies that safeguard our people, protect our natural ecosystems, and promote sustainable development. Sierra Leone has implemented several initiatives aimed at building resilience against climate impact. We're enhancing our early warning systems, improving disaster management, and promoting climate-smart agricultural practices to protect the livelihoods of our farmers. Our coastal zones, which are at risk of severe erosion and flooding, are also receiving attention through nature-based solutions and mangrove restoration projects. However, the scale and urgency of these challenges require greater international collaboration and financial resources. Our country is committed to transitioning to a low-carbon economy despite our negligible contribution to global emissions. We're seeking investment in renewable energy projects, including solar and hydro, to improve energy access while minimizing environmental impact. Reforestation initiatives are also underway, contributing to carbon sequestration and biodiversity conservation. Yet these efforts can only be sustained with scaled up and adequate climate finance and technology transfer. Sierra Leone acknowledges the progress made in mobilizing climate finance, but significant gaps remain. The availability of finance is vital for implementing our ambitious climate actions. We call for more equitable and transparent allocation of resources, ensuring that vulnerable nations receive the support needed to adapt to climate change and mitigate its impact. The Sierra Leone strongly supports the establishment of a more ambitious and effective finance framework under NCQG. We expect a framework that's adequate and predictable, with adequate and predictable funding that's accessible with fair allocation, prioritization for adaptation, and support for loss and damage. As an LDC, Sierra Leone's capacity to respond to climate change remains constrained by finance, infrastructure deficits, and the socioeconomic impact of the climate crisis. We reaffirm our commitment to the principles of the Paris Agreement and the pursuit of climate justice. We stand ready to collaborate with regional organizations and international partners. Mr. President, in conclusion, our shared future depends on our collective action today. Sierra Leone remains hopeful that Cop29 will deliver ambitious outcomes grounded in solidarity and a recognition of the unique vulnerabilities faced by countries like ours. Together, we can build a world where our children and future generations inherit a planet that is resilient, equitable, and thriving. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Simonas Kentvilas, Minister of Environment of Lithuania. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Fellow leaders, ladies and gentlemen, over the last decade, every corner of the globe has been affected by destructive consequences of climate change. And yet today, despite all the warning signs, the global community is far from reaching the goals of Paris Agreement. Our meeting represents another opportunity to act. A good start would be transitioning away from fossil fuels by tripling global renewable energy capacity and doubling energy-saving efforts by 2030, as agreed last year in Dubai. Unfortunately, the first program assessment shows that our collective efforts were not enough. We can and must do better. My country, Lithuania, has already chosen ambitious green transition. We are following through with clear commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions at least by 70% by 2030, compared to 1990s level, and become climate neutral country by 2050. By 2030, Lithuania's national electricity grid will turn green, with share of electricity from renewable energy sources reaching 100%. Our total installed solar and wind power has quadrupled since 2020 and is expected to more than double by 2026 in 2 years. Share of renewable energy in our heating sector is also to reach 100% in 2050. Today, Lithuania calls for ambitious and balanced outcome here in Baku, which means implementing all the elements of global stocktake decision. It will be crucially important for international community to increase mitigation ambition in line with 1.5 temperature goal. We must move towards the long-term resilience and reach new agreement in new collective quantified goal on climate finance. This goal should be realistic and closely linked to mitigation efforts in every single country. The quantum of the goal must be linked to expanded group of contributors, reflecting evolution of countries' economic capabilities and increasing shares of global greenhouse gas emissions, including the present ones, not only historical ones. Finally, I also encourage international community to address enormous environmental damage caused by Russia in its war of aggression against Ukraine, as mentioned in Ukraine's statement. Lithuania supports establishment of international platform that would make Russia accountable for consequences of its action, including damage on its environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Fernando Andres Lopez Larrianaga, Minister of Environment of El Salvador. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Señor Presidente, Excelencias, distinguidos delegados, agradezco a Azerbaiyán por su hospitalidad como anfitrión de esta 29ª Conferencia de las Partes. Represento a El Salvador, una nación en el corazón de Centroamérica, conocida por su gente, la riqueza de sus volcanes, sus playas, el surf de clase mundial y ahora por ser uno de los países más seguros del mundo. El cambio que ha tenido El Salvador en los últimos años ha sido el resultado de tomar decisiones que beneficien a los ciudadanos, quienes ratificaron el voto de confianza a nuestro gobierno en febrero de este año. El clima nos afecta, y mucho. Nuestro país es impactado año con fenómenos hidrometeorológicos que suceden cada vez más frecuentemente y son cada vez más extremos. En estas últimas semanas, nuestra región ha experimentado los efectos de varios fenómenos climáticos que han puesto en riesgo la vida de nuestros ciudadanos. En este momento es donde deben fortalecerse los lazos de hermandad entre las naciones para trabajar por el bienestar de todos. La realidad climática en nuestra región tiene impactos económicos profundos. ¿Cuánto le cuesta al país un cierre de carretera por inundaciones repentinas? ¿Cuánto le cuesta a la empresa privada no poder mover mercadería o materia prima? ¿Cómo afecta la vida de las personas los desplazamientos forzados por fenómenos climáticos? ¿Cuántas conferencias pasarán para que el mundo vea la realidad climática de nuestras naciones? Los invito a reflexionar. La teoría y la práctica no siempre son iguales. Nuestra ubicación es privilegiada porque estamos en un punto estratégico del continente americano, sirviendo como un puente natural entre el norte y el sur. Sin embargo, estamos en el epicentro de la crisis climática y a pesar que El Salvador emite solo el 0.04% de las emisiones globales de gases de efecto invernadero, sufrimos desproporcionadamente sus consecuencias. Enfrentamos cambios en los patrones de lluvia, eventos hidrometeorológicos extremos, sequías prolongadas y aumento de las temperaturas. Todo ello son consecuencias devastadoras para nuestra infraestructura, nuestros medios de vida y nuestros ecosistemas. Esto nos obliga a declarar emergencias nacionales con frecuencia y ante esta realidad nuestra prioridad siempre ha sido estar preparados para proteger la vida de la población y la economía nacional, comprometiéndonos a enfrentar los desafíos ambientales a través de acciones reales. Uno de los logros más recientes de nuestro gobierno ha sido la conversión de deuda por naturaleza más grande en la historia del país, de $1.000 millones. Esta histórica medida asegura recursos para la conservación de cuencas hidrográficas, especialmente la cuenca de nuestro río más caudaloso, el río Lempa, una de las principales fuentes de agua para nuestra nación. Este compromiso garantiza medios de implementación para la conservación de ecosistemas, restauración ambiental y la seguridad hídrica de nuestro país. A esto agrego que hemos desarrollado una estrategia de financiamiento climática destinada a movilizar recursos que nos permiten implementar acciones en sectores prioritarios. Esta estrategia tiene un enfoque de doble dividendo, no solamente impulsa la adaptación y la mitigación frente a los efectos adversos del clima, sino también promueve el desarrollo sostenible mediante la creación de empleos verdes, mejorando la calidad de vida de nuestra población. El Salvador trabaja. Como país estamos impulsando la electromovilidad y las energías renovables. Nuestra matriz energética está conformada por el 91% de energías renovables, además de apostar por la reconversión de nuestras industrias, asegurando que esas inversiones no solamente reduzcan emisiones, sino que también generen oportunidades económicas para nuestros ciudadanos. El Salvador trabaja en la creación de un mercado nacional de carbono con el fin de establecer opciones económicas viables que beneficien a nuestros ecosistemas. Somos referentes en el monitoreo y gestión de sistemas de alerta temprana. Esto nos permite analizar proyecciones y generar alertas tempranas que son parte fundamental del Sistema Nacional de Protección Civil. Los efectos adversos del clima en nuestro país son evidentes. En las últimas 3 décadas, los desastres climáticos han generado pérdidas equivalentes al 13.3% de nuestro Producto Interno Bruto, afectando principalmente al sector agropecuario, transporte y vivienda. En términos humanos, más de 1.9 millones de personas han sido afectadas y lamentamos la pérdida de cientos de vidas consecuencia de estos eventos extremos. El Salvador está comprometido para enfrentar el riesgo climático. El futuro no se espera, se construye. Y hoy, cada acción que tomemos es una semilla para el mundo que dejaremos a las próximas generaciones. Es el momento de actuar, no hay tiempo que perder. Gracias.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Umaira Tagieva, Deputy Minister of Ecology and Natural Resources of the Republic of Azerbaijan. You have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, on behalf of the Republic of Azerbaijan, I would like to express our deepest gratitude to global community for entrusting us with the honor to hosting COP29. It is a privilege to welcome you all to Azerbaijan as we join forces in tackling one of the greatest challenges of our time. Azerbaijan is fully committed to advancing climate action and achieving our national targets. Last year, they set an ambitious goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2050 compared to 1990 level. They have also pledged to increase the share of renewable energy with our total installed electricity capacity by 30% by 2030, in line with global efforts to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. Green energy zones established in Karabakh, Eastern Zangezur, Nakhchivan will directly lead to mitigation, specifically in energy sector. They are currently revising those targets from our updated NDC 3.0. The new submission will outline detailed strategies for reduction emission across key industries, reinforcing our commitment to net zero carbon future. They are also integrating climate consideration into national level strategies and policies. Clean environment and green growth, one of the priority out of total 5 under Azerbaijan 2030 national priorities for socio-economic development approved by the President of Azerbaijan. Moreover, strategy for socio-economic development for 2022-2026 specifically envisages reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. The action under this strategy are fully aligned with international initiatives on climate change, and its implementation will directly contribute to the fulfillment of our international commitment and achievement of our goal. Apart from this, implementing robust measures to enhance energy efficiency, transition to low-emission transportation, adopt clean technology in industry, improve waste management system, and strengthen forest conservation just few examples of actions. Transparency remains a cornerstone of our climate action strategy. They have prepared our first BTR, providing clear and reliable data on our progress. This report demonstrates Azerbaijan's commitment to international climate agreement and underscores our dedication to accountability and trust building. As a country highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change, adaptation is top of priority for us. Our newly developed National Adaptation Plan set out comprehensive strategies to address key challenges, particularly in agriculture, water, and coastal zone management, and of course, disaster risk reduction. They are determined to build resilience and protect our community from the growing risk posed by climate change. In this context, the plan to establish a modern early warning system and continuously enhance the coverage of this system in order to not leave no one behind. While Azerbaijan is making significant progress in addressing climate change, they recognize that this is a global challenge that requires a global solution. They emphasize the principle of common but differentiated responsibility, which must guide our efforts, taking into account historical emission and differing capacities of countries to respond. They also acknowledge the importance of adequate financial support and technology transfer, which are essential to accelerate climate action. Dear colleagues, I would like to reaffirm Azerbaijan's strong commitment to collective climate action. We believe that through cooperation and shared ambition, they can build a resilient, low-carbon future that benefits all nations. Let us use COP29 as a platform for meaningful progress and lasting impacts. I thank you.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Malcolm Brian Staffkens Salgado, Vice Minister, Secretariat of Natural Resources and Environment of Honduras. You have the floor.
Excelencias, distinguidos delegados, colegas, amigos, quiero comenzar por agradecer al gobierno de Azerbaiyán y su pueblo y a la presidencia de la COP29. Desde Honduras, un país pequeño en emisiones, pero gigante en sacrificios, levantamos la voz. Somos un país que ha contribuido de manera mínima al cambio climático, pero sufrimos sus consecuencias de manera devastadora. Huracanes más destructivos, sequías más prolongadas y la pérdida de ecosistemas esenciales son una carga que no es solo nuestra, pero que llevamos. Estamos aquí bajo la
at the heart of our battle. Without access to and sustainable management of this resource, any effort at adaptation or mitigation will be insufficient. In Honduras, our rivers and river basins, which are essential for our survival, have been impacted by mining policies and a lack of care for a vital resource. Water is life, and climate justice must begin by giving it pride of place, also providing fair and equitable compensation for its use and exploitation, and ensuring the use of this resource for future generations. But we wish to highlight an obstacle we face: debt. Honduras, like many other developing countries, is having to deal with limitations on its ability to achieve its development goals because of a growing burden of existing debt, which restricts its capacity through more indebtedness. And this is compounded by the high cost of capital and limited access of the country to public finance based on donations or highly concessional funding. In the current context, Honduras is facing difficult decisions between funding its development priorities and implementing the goals established in our NDC, while we continue to have to face growing loss and damage as a result of the climate crisis. To tackle this reality, we need the developed countries and the international financial architecture not only to recognize these constraints, but also to establish a clear path for comprehensively addressing the current debt crisis, ensuring that climate finance does not contribute to exacerbating this situation in the future. Therefore, we appeal for the decision on the NCQG to include options which address these issues in a comprehensive manner, beginning with greater transparency in the area of debt, as well as relief, condoning and assistance in respect of debt. Our natural resources are not only ours, they are pillars of the global equilibrium, and we want to see them recognized as strategic assets in the context of climate finance. Water, forests, and the ecosystems we protect are invaluable public goods which must be compensated for fairly. This is not charity, it's shared global responsibility. And from our presidency of the Tropical Forest Countries Coalition, we urge steps to allow for progress with Article 6 of the Paris Agreement and carbon markets in the context of Article 5.2 as a finance mechanism for us to be able to conserve our important carbon sinks. However, these must be accessible and fair, benefiting countries like Honduras, which, notwithstanding its vulnerability, contribute significantly to climate equilibrium through its forests and ecosystems. At the heart of this battle is the hands of our people, our peasants, indigenous communities, Afro-descendant communities, and our martyrs who have defended our resources so courageously. And for them, and for the right of all to a worthy future, we reaffirm our international commitments. And now, more than ever, we need a paradigm shift. The developed countries, which have constructed their wealth at the cost of the planet, must shoulder their responsibility through concrete actions and accessible and fair funding. Honduras is ready to lead responsibly, but we need the world to join us by providing resources, justice and solidarity. Today, at this decisive moment, we face a choice: continue perpetuating a system which benefits few over and above the well-being of humanity and the planet, or the developed countries will shoulder their historic responsibility, not as a favor, but as a duty to the world we share. Our developing countries have brought our resolve to bear, and now it's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Juan Carlos Munoz, Minister of Transport and Telecommunications of Chile. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, President.
Chile
is committed to climate ambition. We're one of the few countries, developing countries, that have established a goal of achieving carbon neutrality and resilience by 2050. The framework climate change law provides for governance that makes sure that national, regional, and municipal governments include a climate strategy in most of their policies by developing plans, strategies, regulations, and economic instruments. Chile is highly vulnerable to climate change. We've been affected by prolonged drought in addition to fires and floods affecting the poorest of our peoples and local communities that are most exposed. And it's for this reason that we have come up with inclusive policies with a view to just transition. Our legislation places at the center of the objective achieving an NDC and long-term climate strategy, and provides guidance for developing sectoral mitigation and adaptation plans, each one with an implementation strategy. This comprehensive governance of focus helps us to come up with a firm state climate policy based on science and backed by multiple instruments that make sure that we can achieve our national objectives. In transport, we have also adopted a holistic and inclusive policy. And in doing so, we have come up with a comprehensive plan that combines GHG reduction strategies and adaptation measures. Among the main initiatives, we can mention electromobility, expanded mass transit, and developing our rail network. These actions not only seek to reduce GHG emissions, but also to reduce local pollution and improve the living conditions of people by offering them more comfortable, healthy, and safe transport options. Our long-term climate strategy has already come up with ambitious goals for the coming decades, including one that by 2040 would ensure that 100% of our public transport is zero emissions. To achieve this, we have a national subsidies law that will give us 1.5 billion a year to ensure that we can have electric transport, public transport. This law recently extended to 2032, provides for stability and predictability in planning investment in sustainable public transport at the national level. The resources enable us to implement regulations and electromobility policies in large and mid-sized cities, promoting open and competitive bidding that ensure quality services. And that means that in Santiago we already have we have additional buses to make sure that in the 18 months we will be fully electromobile. We're also intensely investing in public transport, and we have a metro that will add 75 kilometers to a network that already has 149 kilometers of railways. We also have trains for Chile, which we are developing to link Santiago, Concepcion, and Valparaiso. We're also coming up with dozens of master bicycle path plans for major cities. We also are building 800 kilometers of bicycle paths in Santiago to densify and better connect the network of bicycle paths so that more people would use bicycles as a safe and viable option. Sir, through these initiatives, the Ministry of Transport and Telecommunications reaffirms its commitment to lead efforts to mitigate climate change, adapt to its effects, and to build a cleaner, efficient, and inclusive transport system for our future generations. Transport is a key sector in tackling climate change, and the measures that I have pointed to demonstrate Chile's commitment to this. This is directly benefiting the lives of our people and is a factor that helps build social justice and integration. We're working on all these initiatives and folding them into a new NDC that we will publish in 2025. And here I can tell you that we will ensure that we always face our climate ambition challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Raquel Soto Torres, Vice Minister for Strategic Natural Resources Development of Peru. You have the floor.
Honorable Señor Presidente.
Distinguished Chair, distinguished Ministers, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Your Excellencies, climate change is intensifying in the world, and Peru is not immune to its effects. As a country with fragile ecosystems which are highly vulnerable to climate change, we need to enlarge our ability to adapt to the adverse impacts which are happening recurringly, such as the case with drought and forest fires in Amazonia, or the loss of glacier coverage. Peru has complied with the need to establish a national adaptation plan, and we've incorporated it into our national climate change strategy and in our NDCs. However, climate funding is still insufficient. And I'd like to point out that we must correct the course of the mitigation work program, ensuring that it is scaled up urgently, especially with respect to our ambition and implementation of our commitments. Also, the global stocktake depends on decisions we take at this COP. We restate the need for a decision which will afford us sufficient time, flexibility, and regional inclusiveness to guarantee more ambitious policies. In this context, I wish to underscore the importance of the assessment reports of the IPCC so that we have timely information regarding the global stocktake cycle. Related to this, we believe that the UAE dialogue should guarantee that all the results of the global stocktake are complied with and the means required are mobilized. Peru is taking steps to deal with adaptation and mitigation as cross-cutting aspects in all public policies and activities. But we need resources for this purpose and to cover the loss and damage which we have to face. It's very important for the new financing goal to support all developing countries in a fair manner with new, additional, adequate, accessible resources which do not generate debt. Ever since it was created, the Lima work program on gender has made progress in integrating and mainstreaming the gender perspective in climate policies. We are especially worried that some countries wish to backslide on issues already agreed upon under this program. For Peru, it's important to undertake the revision and updating of the work program in order to reduce the remaining gaps, and it's essential for there to be a human rights cross-cutting approach to climate action. And when we are seeking a comprehensive approach with respect to just transition, covering multiple sectors with implementation resources receiving international cooperation, we highlight the importance of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, since it provides a fine opportunity for speeding up the transition towards low-carbon economies. And here we need to establish clear rules for the carbon market, guaranteeing environmental and social integrity of projects and programs. Aware of the emergency of the climate crisis, Peru has made an important stride with the adoption of the regulation of a national register of mitigation measures, thereby establishing a clear and transparent framework for the carbon market using cooperative approaches and a voluntary carbon market. We trust that this will allow us to accelerate the implementation of our nationally determined contributions, improve our resilience, and position Peru as an attractive destination for sustainable investment. Another important milestone I'm pleased to announce is the recent updating of our national climate change strategy, which it has a country vision and directs the various stakeholders and sectors towards resilience and carbon neutrality, which we hope to achieve by 2050. Now more than ever, it's vital we all work hand in hand to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, and the work of the high-level champions on climate action is particularly important in order to make the combating of climate change cross-cutting. So that mandate needs to be updated beyond 2025. And I conclude on behalf of Peru by urging all parties and stakeholders to step up our cooperation to implement the multilateral regime which we've agreed upon in a comprehensive manner. This is what will determine whether we robustly respond to the grave threat of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Than Likong, Vice Minister of Natural Resources and Environment of Vietnam. You have the floor.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I would like to extend my congratulations and appreciation to the Republic of Azerbaijan for the excellent arrangement and meaningful outcome of the Cop29. Ladies and gentlemen, the year 2024 is on track to be the warmest year on record. Droughts, heat waves, wildfire, floods, tropical cyclones occur in many parts of our world, including Vietnam, and make significant negative impact to the global economy. Vietnam has integrated measures for responding to climate change and the implementation of our NDC into the law on environmental protection and other legal documents, long-term strategy, program, and social and economic development plan of country. Ladies and gentlemen, the result of the 2023 Global Stocktake shows that current commitments are insufficient, highlighting a lack of trust and of implementation to realize commitment into practical action, so that we embrace the theme of this year COP29, in solidarity for a green world, which emphasizes two key pillars: enhance ambition and enable action. At this conference, Vietnam proposed, first, developed countries to take lead in fulfilling their responsibility by committing to net zero emission by 2040, significantly ahead of the developing nation. The level of climate finance contribution should reach $1 trillion per year for the period up to 2030, so that developing countries can respond to climate change and implement a just transition in economy, society, and environment. Financial resources for adaptation must be adequate with those for mitigation and must be transparent, verifiable, and easily accessible. Second, countries need to implement the national determined contribution for the current period and urgently develop NDC version 3 for the next period. Fulfilling commitment will strengthen trust among nations and help resolve challenges and obstacles in ongoing climate negotiations. Third, it is necessary to promote international cooperation and central role of the United Nations in responding to climate change, including implementing the Early Warning for All initiative, with a focus on supporting developing countries to improve their early warning system and respond to natural disasters. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Edwin J. Castellanos, Vice Minister of Natural Resources and Climate Change of Guatemala. You have the floor.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates and colleagues, Guatemala thanks Azerbaijan for its hospitality and leadership in the organization of this important COP29. Guatemala is one of the 20 mega-diverse countries in the world and is also recognized as being multicultural, multi-ethnic and multilingual. We only contribute 0.11% of global greenhouse gas emissions, mostly from our forestry sector and the energy sector. However, because of its geography and socioeconomic status, we are highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. Over the last 15 years, we have reported more than 11,000 cases of droughts, storms, hurricanes and floods, which have caused massive economic and environmental loss and damage and gravely affected the well-being of our population. We emphasize the urgent need for stepping up our collective efforts to combat climate change. This global emergency demands a resolute and greater ambition of all countries in accordance with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. The industrialized countries must shoulder their historical responsibility and increase their efforts to expedite mitigation more ambitiously and robustly in order to achieve the goal of keeping warming to a maximum of 1.5 degrees. Guatemala reaffirms its commitment to intensify efforts both on mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Thus, we are seeking to achieve a net zero forestry budget to recover and subsequently increase forestry coverage involving all sectors of the country. In addition, individuals and rural communities will benefit from the payment of carbon certificates through the emissions reduction program, which seeks to bring about a reduction of 10.5 million tons of CO2 in 5 years. In keeping with the Dubai decision, this year the government of Guatemala ceased the exploitation of an oil deposit in a national park, which is an important Ramsar wetland. In 2026, the petrol we use will contain 10% ethanol by law, and by 2032 we shall increase the energy mix of renewable energy from 60% to 80%. And last week at this conference, Guatemala acceded to the global methane pledge. The support and solidarity of the international community are essential in combating climate change. We restate the urgent need for the developed countries to comply with their financial commitments and bolster the transparency and governance mechanisms. We strongly emphasize the importance of making progress on the negotiation of the new collective quantified goal in line with the Paris Agreement goal. It is a priority matter to have just, fair, flexible and efficient access to climate finance for all developing countries in all regions, with a balanced approach between adaptation and mitigation efforts, guaranteeing highly concessional funding, which does not generate more debt. This international support will allow countries like Guatemala effectively to implement large-scale adaptation actions, both to reduce the vulnerability of our local communities, indigenous peoples, women, girls and boys, who are those most effective, and to contribute to the strengthening of mitigation actions. I avail myself of this opportunity to acknowledge the efforts and contribution of various international partners, including the government of Taiwan, through bilateral and multilateral cooperation. We are at a critical juncture. It is paramount that we act to safeguard the well-being of today's people and future generations. Guatemala restates its commitment to work with resolve to achieve a fair and sustainable future for each and everyone, leaving nobody behind. Thank you.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Ana Emilia Pimentel Rodriguez, Vice Minister of Climate Change and Sustainability of Dominican Republic. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair.
Excellencies and distinguished colleagues, I greet you respectfully on behalf of the Dominican Republic. I would like to sincerely thank the government of Azerbaijan for the hospitality afforded us and the presidency of Cop29 for the leadership in this crucial forum. The Dominican Republic is standing here before you today, aware of the magnitude of the challenges facing humankind. As a nation firmly committed to the principles of the Paris Agreement, we recognize the urgency of collectively acting to tackle the global climate crisis. Excellencies, in the last 3 years, the Dominican Republic has been facing devastating storms, massive flooding, and extreme periods of drought with economic and social consequences that are serious. This climate shift affects us profoundly, reducing our crop yields, destabilizing our communities, and limiting our opportunities for development. In addition to this, there is a growing challenge of sargassum, which is affecting our coastlines and directly affecting the tourism sector and overwhelming our local capacities. Waste has led to millions of dollars of losses and is threatening the stability of a key industry for our economy. How can we build resilience when the resources to do so are so elusive? The results of the global stocktake are clear. We are not doing enough to limit warming. This year, we could see that the three Rio conventions are meeting consecutively, and this is a historic opportunity to highlight the nexus of these agendas, because without biodiversity there is no resilience, and without resilience there is no water, and without water there is no sustainable development. And it's for this reason that we have come to this COP with clear commitments, very clear commitments. We have scaled up our ambition of our NDC, and we reaffirm our commitment to protect 30% of our marine and land territory. Climate financing is the bridge connecting our goals to tangible action. We're not asking for charity, we're asking for justice. Justice for our communities, our ecosystems, and our future generations. But we need an international financial system that is appropriate, adequate, accessible, and sufficient. The current system is fragmented and too complex for the most vulnerable countries, as ethos has pointed out. Without timely financing, we will not be able to deal with the issue of loss and damage, nor implement adaptation and mitigation solutions. We reiterate that these commitments must be followed up by immediate and tangible actions. If the developed world does not fulfill its promises, they will condemn the small island developing states and vulnerable states to continued disaster, forced displacement, and humanitarian crises. Excellencies, humanity cannot afford any more inaction. The time for change is now. Our decisions today must honor the trust placed in us by present and future generations. Let's move forward together towards a genuinely just, accessible, and transparent financial agreement. Thank you.
It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Kenrick Williams, Vice President, Vice Minister of Sustainable Development and Climate Change of Belize. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I am happy to convey greetings on behalf of the Honorable Prime Minister, John Briceño, and the people of Belize. Mr. President, I also extend my delegation's appreciation to your government for the warm reception that we have received since arriving in Baku. While we gather here, the climate emergency continues to tighten its grip on vulnerable nations like Belize, continuously and consistently eroding any progress we make. Every day, our communities are experiencing and living the escalating impacts of the climate emergency. Irreversible impacts unfold with each an increasing fraction of a degree, magnifying the devastation, while every moment of inaction exacts a toll on lives, ecosystems, and livelihoods. Every climate-related disaster serves as a profound reminder. Adaptation investment is not a luxury, nor is it a charity. Rather, it is indispensable for our survival. Like other SIDS, we face unique vulnerabilities with limited capacity to adapt. Just this past Sunday, Tropical Storm Sora made landfall in Belize, bringing intense rainfall, widespread flooding, and threatening lives and livelihoods of our people. Coupled with the most severe wildfires this year and Hurricane Lisa in 2023, aggregate loss and damage stands over $200 million, or over 6% of GDP in just 2 years. Regrettably, this cycle of loss and damage reoccurs much too often. This is why we need doubling of adaptation finance, and we need fast-tracking of loss and damage finance. Belize, a small nation with an overwhelming stake in this crisis, stands here, not just with words, but with the weight of our people's future. Our position is clear. Climate justice and equity must prevail. We are the ones who are already suffering, and the most who stand to lose everything unless we act now. As the world edges closer to permanently breaching 1.5 degrees of warming, the toll on our ecosystems, economies, and our communities is devastating. The transition away from fossil fuel is mandatory and urgent. We call on G20 to bring forward 1.5 aligned NDCs immediately. Belize is already doing its part, but all our efforts will be undermined if those who are most responsible fail to act with the urgency and scale that is required. Climate finance remains critically inadequate. The NCQG must reflect the urgency we face and ensure new, predictable, accessible finance that responds to our unique vulnerabilities and is fit for purpose. The costed NDCs for SIDS alone is conservatively estimated at $86 billion by 2030. Without global support and means of implementation, which we were promised, our path is unsustainable. Mr. President, I echo the words of our Belizean youth. The future belongs to the youth, who hold the power to shape a Belize that is educated, equal, free from poverty, safe, resilient, and sustainable for all. Excellencies, the UNFCCC Preamble and the Paris Agreement emphasizes the need for the broadest possible global participation to address climate change effectively. Restricting Taiwan, the 21st largest economy with significant expertise and resources, from full engagement with the UNFCCC process contradicts these principles and undermines collective efforts to achieve the Paris Agreement. Belize urges the international community to transcend political considerations and support Taiwan's peaceful, pragmatic, and meaningful participation, enabling its contribution towards a net zero climate resilient future. Let us commit today, moving beyond words to implementation. We need urgent action, real, measurable, and immediate steps that match the urgency our people face daily. The clock is ticking, and we are already facing the devastating impacts of inaction. We must act with urgency this crisis demands, or risk consigning our children to a future of uncertainty and loss. I thank you.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency, Ms. Nareen Tamimi, Chairperson of the Environment Quality Authority of the State of Palestine. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Bismillah. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, peace be upon all of you. I would like at the outset to congratulate Azerbaijan, the people, the leadership, and the government of Azerbaijan for having hosted this summit that is entitled Towards a Greener World. And Palestine is part of this world, this greener world, while we are most vulnerable to the climate change and its negative impact. Protection of the environment is actually not an ancillary issue. It is not a secondary option. It is a basic right that is related to all of us as human beings. Our right to live in a safe and clean environment. And this is something that has been enshrined by all international agreements and instruments. However, how can we have this achieved while we see Israel launching a war on our people in Gaza for more than a year? Israel has used more than 80,000 tons of explosives, which is an equivalent of 220 grams per square meter. It has used all that during 1 year, and that has led to a genocide, an ecocide, and the martyrdom of more than 43,000 people, most of which are women and children. Thousands and thousands have been displaced. International reports, either the report from the UNDP or the reports from the World Bank, as well as other international reports, indicate that there is a massive destruction of the infrastructure, of the agricultural land, as well as the sewage and sanitary infrastructure as a result of this genocide. More than 43 million tons of rubble contaminated with hazardous material and permanent organic pollutants, and the entire collapse of the sewage system and the pollution of 90% of our water resources, the spread of contagious diseases are some of the results of that. The emissions of reconstruction have been estimated at no less than 30 million tons of CO2. Turning to the West Bank and East Jerusalem, the occupation continues to burn trees, to confiscate land, to raise land to the ground. And this year only, we have witnessed the confiscation of around 40,000 hectares of agricultural land. And around 50% of our rich natural reserves were annexed for settlement and military expansion in Palestine. And we are committed to the UN FCC, and we have been suffering from the Israeli war on Gaza. In spite of that, we are updating our NDC 3.0. And in Cop28, we have launched a Green Palestine initiative. We have been able to make some achievements with the help of some of our partners. We have a government reform program which enabled us in Palestine to draft the first draft of the environment protection law, including climate change and sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, we urge you, we ask you, you as states, as international organizations, to rise up to your responsibilities by virtue of international law, by virtue of international and multilateral agreements and treaties, to exert pressure, to put an end to this genocide, to cease fire now, to lift the blockade, to lift the embargo on UNRWA, to intensify relief efforts and to enable us to reconstruct in order to reach a final extermination of the Israeli occupation. Thank you.
It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Juan Carlos Monterrey Gomez, Special Representative for Climate Change, Ministry of the Environment, Panama. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, let's stop pretending. Industrialized nations, the most responsible for setting in motion this ecocide, have spectacularly failed not only the developing world, but their own people. 32 years ago, we committed to fixing this crisis, but after decades of empty promises, emissions have doubled, and we are on a pathway to assassinate half of all living creatures on Earth. To avoid this, back in 2010, we were promised 100 billion yearly. Instead, we got massive debt. Others grow and continue to pump oil at record levels, while our people fall further and further into despair. Time and time again, it's the people of Panama and other vulnerable nations that pay the price for your inaction and your greed. Nothing short of despicable. We might be small, but we are giants in climate action and conservation. Panama has protected 35% of its land and more than 55% of its oceans. In any given day, 70 to 90% of our electricity comes from renewables. We are 100% against deep sea mining, 100% against whaling. We are 100% in support of a global plastic treaty that addresses the entire life cycle of plastic, including production. We are 100% in favor of environmental defenders, because we believe that the best way to protect Earth is to defend those that fight for it. While Panama delivers on its promises, others don't. Sadly, our leadership does not exempt us from the impacts of the climate crisis and the upcoming mass extinction. This year alone, drought in the Panama Canal cost us $1 billion in lost revenues. And this is not even counting the ripple effects through our economy and society. Additionally, recent floodings in Azuero, East and West Panama threaten to cost us an additional $300 million plus in damages. This only within a month of torrential extreme rains. Let me be very clear. We are a geographic and diplomatic bridge, but we will not accept being treated as a bridge to carry the burden of others' unfulfilled promises. We have done our part, but the lack of political will for industrialized nations is the reason why trust has eroded in this process. We have been lectured repeatedly on how the 1.3 trillion yearly finance request is out of proportion and quote-unquote unreasonable. So let's do some math together. The annual global economic output, it stands at $100 trillion. As developing nations, we're asking for just 1% of that. 1% of that to save humanity. Is that really too much to ask? You know what's worst? The 1 trillion request does not even put us on a pathway to limit temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It actually put us on a pathway to reaching 2.8 Celsius of warming. So, let's make the numbers speak for themselves. Fossil fuel subsidies amount to $7 trillion annually. For some, $7 trillion annually is not too much to exacerbate the climate crisis, but $1 trillion is too much to save life. Global military spending stands at $2.5 trillion annually. For some, $2.5 trillion to kill each other is not enough. But $1 trillion to save lives is unreasonable. The world's billionaires collectively hold $14.2 trillion. But for some, they will rather let the world burn than tax them. Colleagues, distinguished delegates, the money exists. What does not exist is the political will to save life. Year after year, we're choosing extinction instead of choosing hope. Frankie the Dino put it best. Causing our own extinction is the most ridiculous thing. At least dinosaurs had an asteroid. What is our excuse? Panama does not just build bridges. We cross them with leadership and action. But this bridge must be crossed by everyone. Once again, Panama is bringing to a COP the youngest delegation in the world. The average age of our negotiators is 29 years. And we will not longer lend our future for others to profit. Today, we're still subsidizing the meteor of our era, fossil fuels. This hypocrisy must end. Colleagues, all we're asking you to do is to own your responsibilities in setting this crisis in motion. Nothing less, nothing more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Helga Barodotri, Deputy Director, Ministry of the Environment, Energy and Climate of Iceland. You have the floor.
Ministers, Chair, distinguished delegate. Effects of climate change become clearer with every year. 2024 will most likely be the warmest year yet and the first year to exceed the 1.5 degree temperature goal set by the Paris Agreement. The changes that such a level of warming brings to our planet are devastating. And the climate-related tragedies we have seen in the past years will only be enhanced with further warming. Only well-executed mitigation and adaptation measures will hold the process and prepare societies for what is to come. The Arctic has already warmed far more than the planetary average, and the whole cryosphere is likely to show more extreme symptoms of warming world in the near future. The Arctic continues to see retreating glaciers, loss of biodiversity and conditions that will force the displacement of indigenous peoples whose rights and participation need to be ensured. During the last Arctic Circle conference held in Reykjavik, Iceland last October, 42 scientists from all around the world handed over a letter of concern to the Nordic Council of Ministers. In the letter, the scientists emphasized the risk of change in ocean circulation in the North Atlantic. Pointing towards potential changes in currents such as the AMOC, a warm branch of the Gulf Stream which transport heat from the south towards north, creating the climate conditions we know in Iceland, the Nordic and parts of Northern Europe. Drastic changes in these systems would have serious impacts on living conditions, bringing us towards limit to adaptation. The only way to avoid crossing such tipping points is enhanced and fast climate mitigation action. The government of Iceland has in recent years significantly stepped up commitments to climate finance, with emphasis on balanced approach between mitigation and adaptation. In all our development aid projects, gender equality and human rights are always in focus. Now, it is of great importance to follow up on the outcome of the first global stocktake in a clear and holistic manner. We will not make way in our path forward without robust mitigation efforts. We urge all nations to take action, phase out fossil fuels and build up green energy systems. The only way forward is to course correct towards the 1.5-degree goal of the Paris Agreement and greatly enhance efforts to reduce emissions of greenhouse gases across countries, sectors and systems. Thank you.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Abraham Nasak, Acting Director General for the Ministry of Climate Change of Vanuatu. You have the floor.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great honor that I stand to speak on behalf of the government and people of the Republic of Vanuatu. Vanuatu expresses gratitude for Azerbaijan's leadership and support during Cop29. We acknowledge your commitments to find solutions to move forward by working with us in an open, transparent, inclusive manner to achieve ambitious and impactful outcomes. Urgent climate action addressing the root cause of climate change and the driver of loss and damage by cutting and eliminating greenhouse gas emissions is a key concern for this critical decade as far as urgency of science are concerned. Vanuatu wishes to express our deepest concern with the lack of progress on finance in the NCQG, the Mitigation Work Programme, and Global Goal on Adaptation, which are critical to our survival. With the outcome of the first GST in Dubai last year, we are clearly off track with respect to the goals of the Paris Agreement, and the window for meaningful change is closing. The first GST must be forward-looking, ambitious, and inform the next NDCs, and include tripling of renewable energy goals by 2030, phase out fossil fuels, and mobilize finance for adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage consistent with keeping global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees. 1.5 is non-negotiable, hence means of implementations, finance, technology and capacity building are key to deliver on our global commitments, considering the special circumstances of the small island developing states like Vanuatu. For a highly vulnerable country such as Vanuatu, financial resources mobilized to address adaptation, mitigation and loss and damage must be significantly grant-based, predictable, transformational, logical and without difficult access processes as experienced with the GCF, the GEF and other multilateral funds. We want all governments must agree on a new goal for international climate finance that truly responds to the needs of developing countries. Vanuatu recognizes the inextricable connectivity between climate change and our ocean, which defines who we are. We are deeply concerned with the negative impacts of climate change on our ocean ecosystem, fisheries resources, islands, and livelihoods. We therefore urge and call for more serious treatment of ocean in UNFCCC bodies and processes, and especially at this session. We are concerned with the lack of substantive decision on transparency and the lack of its serious treatment in critical work streams such as the global stocktake. As we gather here at COP29, the ICJ is preparing to hear unprecedented proceedings on the obligations of states regarding climate change and the legal consequences of their actions and inactions. In conclusion, these COPs have been going on for a very long time. We can negotiate as parties here, but it is clear we cannot negotiate with climate change. Our children, youths are expecting us to do the right and needful, reverse and stop greenhouse gas emissions to rein in climate change. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Dendi Abdullah Omar, Secretary General of the Ministry of Environment of Djibouti. You have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, ministers, heads of delegation, allow me to begin by thanking His Excellency Ilham Aliyev, President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, President of Cop29, for the warm hospitality since we have arrived here in Baku. I'm also grateful to the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, Mr. Simon Steele, who made the necessary arrangements to facilitate our work during this conference. The increase in the temperature of the oceans, the rise in sea levels, the loss of sea ice in the Antarctic, and glacier retreat are phenomena confirming the acceleration of global warming. Heat waves, flooding, droughts, and hurricanes have caused devastation and chaos on all continents. As in previous years, 2024 has brought its share of climate change-related disasters. We have witnessed mega fires in Greece and Canada, and at the same time, devastating floods in Japan, Spain, and the U.S. In Africa as well, we've seen flooding damage crops and keep tens of millions of children from going to school. These events are proof positive that climate change is worsening each year and across all continents. CO2 levels are exceeding pre-industrial levels by 50%, and this is trapping heat in the atmosphere. Because of the long lifespan of CO2, temperatures are continuing to increase for many years. And according to the UNEP report, current CO2 emissions are placing us on a trajectory to 3.2 degrees Celsius, which is double the 1.5 under the Paris Agreement. Therefore, we call on industrial countries to reduce drastically their GHG emissions. Sir, the Republic of Djibouti is facing the harmful effects of climate change, especially heat waves, drought, and rising sea levels and flooding. These climate events, which are extreme, are adversely affecting our infrastructure, such as roads, schools, hospitals, and housing. They're also affecting agriculture, fisheries, and tourism. Djibouti has made huge investments to adapt to climate change. And to tackle flooding, we built a dam which protects our capital from flooding. We have also built a levee to protect the coastal city of Chadura from floods. In order to offset dwindling water resources, we built a water pipeline to Ethiopia, and we have desalination plants. We have also bored many wells to mobilize underwater groundwater. With respect to mitigation, Djibouti has engaged in major projects. We have an electric link to Ethiopia to benefit from their hydroelectric output. We also set up a wind farm generating 60 megawatts. In adaptation and mitigation efforts, we have been participating in global climate change efforts. But we need huge financing. Therefore, our NDC needs $3 billion by 2030. We are calling on developed countries to mobilize more financing for vulnerable countries. To take up the challenge of climate change, it is critical that we adopt here at COP29 the annual $1 trillion goal. In conclusion, we're pleased to see the agreement achieved in Sharm el-Sheikh on loss and damage. We want to see the operationalization of this financial instrument, which will enable developing countries to offset loss and damage due to global warming. In COP28 in Dubai, we adopted a significant agreement on transitioning from fossil fuels. We want to see the new quantified collective goal and new agreements on the market mechanism rules. Thank you.
Pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Enrique Ocha Martinez, Undersecretary for Multilateral Affairs and Human Rights of Mexico. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Señora Presidenta.
Madam Chair, all climate reports, including the latest assessment from the IPCC, point in a troubling direction. We are heading fast towards climate disaster. It has to be said loud and clear, there will be no safe place on a planet that is 3 degrees warmer. If we do not drastically and immediately change course, we are heading towards that fatal destiny. And there is no leeway for backsliding on climate commitment and unilateral decisions. Therefore, Mexico today restates its unequivocal backing for multilateralism as the only available means of providing a collective, just and equitable response to the urgent climate crisis. The administration of President Claudia Sheinbaum has stressed, quote, that the development and well-being of the people can only be strengthened by caring for the environment and natural resources, end quote. Consequently, the government of Mexico has announced a new national energy plan which seeks to increase the percentage of electricity generation from clean sources above 40% by 2030. To achieve that goal, without jeopardizing the reliability of the national grid or the affordability of energy, the Federal Electricity Commission will invest $23.4 billion. We will also facilitate the responsible participation of the private sector through investments contributing to local development, fully respecting the rights of the communities that own the land. We will improve energy efficiency, and there will be rapid transition, rapid just energy transition, with the Mexican petroleum company's production limited to 1.8 million barrels a day. Mexico will expand large-scale railway development, promoting intermodal transport, boosting decarbonization of public transport and granting incentives for electrification of the private fleet. We will also boost the recovery and restoration of Mexico's natural heritage, including its main rivers. We have begun a project for waste treatment in Hidalgo province as part of the strategic circular economy plan. These measures exemplify what we have dubbed the humanist, environmental and ecological policy of Mexico's government. All of this will be reflected in the updating of Mexico's NDC to be presented in 2025 with a significant increase in our climate ambition. Alongside this, there will be a national adaptation plan adopted, and we shall soon be publishing the biannual transparency report with voluntary components in addition to those mandated by the Paris Agreement. Madam Chair, from this podium, we address an urgent appeal to all the parties significantly to scale up the ambition of the NDCs, considering a collective financial goal which is commensurate with its scale. For Mexico, there is no effective climate action without a comprehensive human rights-based approach, recognizing the rights of the indigenous peoples, youth, and addresses the structural inequalities which affect women in all their diversity. Therefore, we urge the parties to adopt a new work program on gender and climate change. There's a need to restore trust between the developed and developing countries, following the limited compliance with the goal to mobilize $100 billion through the adoption of a new collective quantified goal, which will address the issue of the financial barriers facing the developing countries. May I conclude, Madam Chair, by recalling the proposal submitted by President Sheinbaum just a few days ago at the summit of G20 leaders to earmark 1% of military spending for reforestation of 15 million hectares, consequently capturing millions of tons of CO2. This, without doubt, would be an action of huge impact for mitigation. The proposal is simple, but it's very clear. The aim is to earmark fewer resources for war in order to sow the seeds of life and the seeds of peace. Thank you.
It is my pleasure to welcome Senator Pauline Anton Prosper, Parliamentary Secretary, Ministry of Education, Sustainable Development, Innovation, Science, Technology, and Vocational Training of St. Lucia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam. The government and people of St. Lucia extend our congratulations to you, Mr. President, for assuming leadership of this vital climate conference. We gather at a crucial moment, one that demands urgency and decisive action to secure our humanity and safeguard our future. Leaders from the Caribbean community make this pilgrimage to COP every year to advocate for meaningful action to address the climate crisis. The stark injustice of a crisis that we did not create is our present painful reality. 4 months ago, Hurricane Beryl, the earliest Category 5 hurricane on record, ravaged the Eastern Caribbean, leaving behind a trail of destruction to homes, infrastructure, agriculture, tourism, and fisheries. We face rising sea levels, soaring temperatures, erratic rainfall, and more intense storms with little to no time for recovery before the next extreme event strikes. The familiar rhythms of life are threatened by the escalating intensity of this climate emergency. The implications for our economies, our people, and our ecosystems are severe. Our developmental gains are undermined as national infrastructure built with significant multilateral loans are destroyed before the debt is paid, and we must rebuild from scratch. The cost of these catastrophes are growing exponentially with every increment of global warming. We cannot avert the climate crisis on our own, even if we do everything we can to limit emissions and seek to adapt as a country and as a region. St. Lucia continues to implement several mitigation and adaptation policies to facilitate climate action. This includes the adoption and implementation of our recently enacted Climate Change Act. SEED spent 18 times more in debt repayments than they have received in climate finance. The annual cost of damage from climate extremes is up to 8% of the entire GDP of SEEDs, irrespective of the growing need for adaptation or the mounting toll of loss and damage. Grants for adaptation take too long to access and are insufficient to meet the scale of our climate-resilient developmental needs. The Loss and Damage Fund is still underfunded and inaccessible. We call for a climate finance goal that guarantees access to grant-based and highly concessional financing tailored to the challenges and unique needs of SEEDs. The window to limit warming below 1.5 degrees is rapidly closing, and with it, the aspirations and future of our people. Global leaders bear the immense responsibility of preserving life on our planet through collective action. We recognize and applaud the contribution of Taiwan to the global effort on climate change and their support for vulnerable countries like St. Lucia, Taiwan must formally be permitted through the UN system to work with the international community in contributing to a net zero world. Climate action is a moral imperative and a matter of climate justice. Together, let's forge a sustainable future for all nations to transition justly, ensuring that our planet is livable for the current and future generation. I thank you.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Ajim Lepui, Permanent Representative of the Federated States of Micronesia to the United Nations. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. With all protocols observed, when most people think of islands and climate change, they picture rising seas slowly swallowing the land sometime in the future. But the truth is more dire. Climate impacts are happening every day, beating down upon our islands and stealing lives and livelihoods day after day. Extreme heat has become a silent killer in Micronesia, with heat-related illness and death rising. This threat targets our most vulnerable, our children, our elderly, those unable to escape the sweltering conditions. It also strikes our food systems, weakening tower crops and coral reefs. Climate impacts are not abstract statistics for us. They are our daily reality. Our days and nights grow steadily hotter. Typhoons battering our shores are stronger and more frequent, and rising seas threaten our coastal communities. The past year brought severe drought across Micronesia, depriving us of fresh water for drinking and food production. Yet, we lack the financial, technical, and infrastructural resources to respond effectively. As discussions on loss and damage continue, the harm escalates. Meanwhile, the fossil fuel industry, and I repeat, the fossil fuel industry, responsible for much of this crisis, enjoys record profits while contributing nothing to those suffering. The ocean, too, is a victim of this warming. As it heats, our island faces triple threat: fish fleeing our waters, dying coral reefs, and ever stronger typhoons fueled by rising sea temperatures. We are not future victims of climate change. We are its present victims, grappling daily with its consequences. The impacts are seeping into our water, fresh water, compromising infrastructure and eroding the marine ecosystem that has sustained our way of life. Adding insult to injury, fossil fuel funding has quadrupled in a single year. This is unconscionable. Now more than ever, the world must phase out fossil fuels and cut super pollutants like methane. Swift and drastic action is our best hope to limit warming this decade. Speed is critical. Non-CO2 gases deliver faster results to avoid warming. They require more priority, funding, and action from all countries. While the world continues to decarbonize, financing must flow swiftly. It must align with real needs of countries, and there must be a genuine increase in funds for the developing world, for loss and damage, for adaptation, for deep mitigation. The global stocktake must keep our momentum, not be blocked at the start. And all countries must ensure their nationally determined contributions reflect a more ambitious commitment to keep 1 degrees Celsius alive. The climate crisis is rife with injustice. Island nations like ours are strengthening our commitments, but we face rising debt as we adapt and recover from intensifying climate emergencies. We are doing our part, but others are not doing enough. The people of Micronesia refuses to surrender to a crisis we did not create. We call on the world's largest polluters to take responsibility. We implore them to act now so that people like ours do not pay the ultimate price. We call upon the world to stop fossil fuel expansion, stop emitting super pollutants, stop overconsumption that depletes shared resources. And we ask the world to start acknowledging responsibility of the past, start safeguarding the lives and resources of the future and those most vulnerable to climate change. Start committing to serious action, and then do not stop until our planet is safe. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency, Ms. Romina Pourmokhtari, Minister of Climate and Environment of Sweden. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Excellencies, colleagues, distinguished delegates, today we stand at a juncture in human history. Climate change is not a distant threat or a vague possibility, it is here and now, with effect all over the globe, demanding united and relentless action from every nation. But I stand here before you not only with a message of urgency, but with one of hope and unparalleled opportunity. Urgency driven by the irrefutable science and the solemn warnings of countless IPCC reports that echo a single stark truth. Climate change threatens our very existence. And opportunity, fueled by the solutions within our reach and the promise of new jobs, growth and prosperity that a green transition will deliver. Sweden commends the historic agreement reached at Cop28 in Dubai, a turning point towards a future liberated from fossil fuels. At Cop29, we must honor this legacy. Renewable energy will lead the way, and nuclear power too has a pivotal role in achieving global net zero emissions by 2050. And by tripling nuclear capacity worldwide, we can keep the 1.5 degrees within reach and stand firm in the fight against climate change. Ahead of COP30, we must all come forward with new nationally determined contributions. Commitments that span our entire economies, cover all greenhouse gases and align fully with the 1.5 goal. Sweden stands ready to be your steadfast partner in shaping and implementing these ambitious NDCs. Sweden is determined to achieve climate neutrality by 2045 at the latest, with net negative emissions beyond that. And our strategy relies on harnessing the innovation and the dynamic of our business sector, many of whom are present here at COP29, pioneering solutions that span over renewable energy, nuclear power, green steel and sustainable finance. Moreover, Sweden is and will remain an unwavering provider of climate finance. Between 2022 and 2023, we have increased our international climate financing by more than $80 million, and Sweden is proud to have announced at this COP a pledge to the Green Climate Fund of more than $750 million, as well as a pledge of approximately $20 million for the fund responding to loss and damage. Yet, to meet the ambitions of the Paris Agreement, we need a fundamental transformation of our domestic and global economies and financial systems. The new collective quantified goal on climate finance must be bold and it must be relevant. We want every country to commit to the new goal, those in a position to do so to contribute financially, and recipient countries to contribute through delivering results for climate action on the ground. Accelerating climate action means that we must also step up adaptation, and we look forward to contributing to a balanced and meaningful outcome across every agenda item. Finally, I cannot overstate the importance of strong, rules-based multilateralism in confronting this existential threat that is facing us all. COP29 must become a beacon of hope, a testament to our shared commitment to climate action. Together, let us be bold, united and resolute. The world is watching. It is time to act. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Jennifer Morgan, State Secretary and Special Envoy for International Climate Action of Germany. You have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present this statement on behalf of Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock of Germany. Did you do everything you could? This is the question that our children will ask us. Everything to make sure our planet will not be torn apart by conflicts over scarce land, food, water. The answer is in the here and now, in the days that we have left here at COP29. We know what we can achieve if we take up our responsibility. A new chapter on climate finance, where we bring all levers into play to get the finance flowing to developing countries at the scale needed. Germany remains committed to its promises. We will do our part. But everyone needs to take responsibility, transparently and particularly according to their economic strength in the here and now, because we cannot address the needs of today with the recipes of the 1990s. We need the private sector. We need simpler procedures to make climate finance accessible for those in need. And we need an ambitious outcome on mitigation. We need an acceleration of a just, equitable, and orderly transition away from fossil fuels, tripling renewable energy, and doubling energy efficiency improvements by 2030. And we are forging ahead. Germany closed 16 coal-fired power plants in 2024. Renewables makes up almost 60% of our electricity consumption. Our gas demand is falling, and we have one of the most stable grids in the world. We are doing our part. And to those who have thoughts about turning the clock back, I say, be warned. The solutions to the climate crisis are the greatest economic opportunity of this generation. Global investments in green energies are twice as high as investments in fossil energies today. And no investor wants to see their investments stranded. So let us seize these opportunities. We want to deliver on our promise to make Europe completely climate neutral by 2050, not only for our own sake, but for all of us. That we can be the first generation that creates a world green and prosperous at the same time, and tell our children and our grandchildren we did the right thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome Her Excellency Ms. Alba Azucena Torres Mejia, Minister Advisor to the President of the Republic of Policy and International Relations, and Ambassador Extraordinaire and Plenipotentiary of Nicaragua to the Republic of Azerbaijan. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Madam President, our delegation has the honor to convey warm and fraternal greetings from the President of the Republic of Nicaragua, Comandante Daniel Ortega Saavedra, and Vice President Comrade Rosario Murillo, to all the countries in attendance, and especially to the people and government of Azerbaijan for their hospitality. Nicaragua recognizes the hard work of the Troika, comprising the successive presidencies of COP28, COP29, and COP30, as well as the Secretariat of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, for organizing this conference. As an integral part of G77 and China, the like-minded developing countries, LMDC, and ALBA, we align ourselves with the statements made by these groups. We firmly express our support of and solidarity with the Palestinian people and reaffirm that the Palestinian cause is alive and present in all international forums and in the global conscience. We reaffirm the justice of the Palestinian cause and the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and to establish their state in all occupied territories. The climate crisis we face demands a greater, more collective, firmer, fairer, and more ambitious commitment, but in accordance with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. The ravages of climate change continue to worsen. And although Nicaragua is not responsible for climate change because we only emit 0.06% of total greenhouse gases, we are, however, suffering harsh impacts from extreme, which is causing grave loss and damage equivalent to 8% of our GDP, and with catastrophic consequences on our people, especially the poorest of our people. As expressed by our Vice President of the Republic, Comrade Rosario Murillo, what they refer to as climate change is no longer climate change. It is destroyed land. It is our Mother Earth, which we have stripped of its protective and natural elements. It's our plundering and desire to take everything in exchange for nothing. And as a result, we are left with the consequences. And this is what is producing these phenomena that we're now referring to as climate change. There is no doubt that the root of the climate crisis is the responsibility of the large capitalist economies, mainly Western powers that apply and expand destructive models of production and consumption. It is therefore imperative that developed countries, mainly those in the global north, comply with the goal of reducing emissions by 50% by 2030 based on their historical responsibilities. Madam Chair, concrete results are urgently needed at this COP29 based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, and the strengthening of climate justice and the indispensable reparation policy transformed into direct, unconditional, and respectful cooperation geared towards achieving a new collective quantified goal that allows for financing for the most vulnerable countries in a real way in order to fight the climate crisis. We must move towards a new global order and a multipolar world with equitable, supportive, and transparent actions and agreements, rebuilding trust in multilateralism through inclusion and continuing to work to strengthen and guarantee peace and security at a global level. In closing, Nicaragua is convinced that the presence of the entire international community without exclusions at this COP29 is vital to achieve a world of understanding, peace, justice, solidarity, and development, and that climate action must be centered on the peoples of the world, prioritizing adaptation, resilience, and the well-being of the most sensitive communities. It is time to move from promises to concrete action. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Ado Soares Barbosa, Special Envoy and Ambassador at Large for Climate Affairs of Timor-Leste. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the government of Azerbaijan for the leadership in hosting this Cop29 here in the beautiful city of Baku. Climate change is no longer an abstract danger for our world today. It is a tangible reality affecting our lives and livelihoods. It has been negatively affected global socio-economic development and environmental sustainability. The least developed countries, LDCs, and small island developing states, SIDS, are the most severely affected, despite contributing the least to the global greenhouse gas emissions. Climate justice must be at the core of our global collective actions. Madam President, Timor-Leste has been experiencing various climate change impacts such as floods, droughts, landslides, and sea level rise. These climate change impacts lead to decrease in agricultural production, food insecurity, water shortage, destruction of infrastructure, loss of human life, as well as human displacement. Madam President, business as usual is no longer appropriate for our world today. We must act decisively, guided by the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. The developed country parties need to take the lead in mitigating their greenhouse gas emissions, and other emitting countries need to do so in order to achieve the global temperature goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius and ensuring net zero emission by 2050. Timor-Leste is fully engaged to pursuing a low-carbon development path with a focus on promoting renewable energy technologies and reforestation. The developed country parties must fulfill their commitment to provide financial, technological, and capacity building support to developing countries, especially the LDCs and SIDS, to implement adaptation, mitigation, and address loss and damage. The COP29 must deliver climate finance under the new collective quantified goal, NCQG. The new scale of finance must be over and above the current 100 billion per year US dollar to at least 1.3 trillion US dollar annually by the period of 2026 up to 2035. This NCQG must capture adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage, and defining climate finance as new and additional to the existing development assistance. We appreciate the current pledges made for addressing loss and damage, but these are insufficient. Greater contributions are urgently required to meet the needs of the most affected developing countries. The operating entities of financial mechanism of the Convention must simplify their access modalities and enhancing direct access for increasing country ownership and ensuring sustainability. Being the least emitting countries with high vulnerable to the impact of climate change, adaptation is highest priority for Timor-Leste. The country has formulated its national adaptation plan with various adaptation priorities. We call developed country parties to provide financial support for the full implementation of our key adaptation priorities under the NAP in order to increase our resilience. Let us act together for a better resilience, prosperity of our people, and safeguarding our Mother Earth. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Gideon Bahar, Ambassador, Special Envoy for Climate Change and Sustainability for the State of Israel. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Hello. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, Shalom.
At the beginning of my statement, I would like to express our most sincere appreciation and gratitude for the government and people of Azerbaijan for hosting us all for this conference. As we speak, climate negotiations are underway. It's true that many of these talks have led to frustration. Key issues remain unresolved, and it often feels like we are taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But let's not lose the bigger picture. The science is clearer than ever. Human activity is driving the climate crisis, and this is the critical decade to act. Every country must enhance its climate plans, its NDCs. We all know the direction: reducing emissions, investing in clean energy, and embracing the technologies of the future. This COP must build on the achievements and progress already made in previous COPs and show tangible and clear results on the main issues at hand: mitigation, adaptation, climate finance, Article 6, gender, and more. This is the only way to reach transformation and make the necessary progress towards saving our planet. For Israel, this transformation is not just an option, it's a necessity. Despite one of the darkest years in our history, an ongoing war of survival, following the brutal attacks of Hamas on October 7th last year, the continuous bombardments of Israeli towns by Hezbollah terrorist organization, and the suffering of our 101 hostages in tunnels in Gaza, we have not lost the vision of the future. Israel is committed to the global effort to combat the climate change. We have introduced a carbon tax, and our new climate law is advancing through Parliament. Israel has brought to Baku 20 cutting-edge climate tech companies that represent Israel's thriving climate innovation for clean energy, sustainable agriculture, food security, and water technologies. Solutions that have a potential to benefit our region and the entire world. For Israel, we have no choice but to focus on the future. The choices we all make here today are about building a future for generations to come. We must act together with urgency, with hope, and with a solid belief that we are building something far greater than the challenges we face. Thank you very much. Toda rabba.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. David Ati Tiebo, Ambassador of the Republic of Kiribati to the People's Republic of China. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. COP President, Excellencies, esteemed delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I begin by sharing the peace and the blessings of the Almighty, along with our warm greetings of the people and the government of Kiribati. And salam to you all. As we gather here at Cop29 under the remarkable organization and gracious hospitality of the people in the government of the Republic of Azerbaijan, we are united, and we must be united by the urgent responsibility to address the defining security threat of our time, the climate crisis. For Kiribati, who contributes minimal to global emissions, this is not an abstract challenge. Climate change is a daily reality. Rising seas and intensifying natural disasters threaten our homes, our livelihoods, and our very way of life. Kiribati's key message to COP29 is clear. keeping 1.5 degrees alive and keeping our climate resilience sustainable. As such, we acknowledge the vital importance of the $100 billion annual climate finance commitment to supporting developing nations, particularly small island states, developing states like Kiribati. However, while this pledge is a critical step towards addressing our unique vulnerabilities, it falls far short of meeting the scale of the challenges we face. The new collective quantified goal on climate finance must be predictable and accessible. For us, this funding is crucial to strengthen coastal defenses, secure freshwater resources, and build resilient infrastructure. Addressing loss and damage is indispensable to counter the impact beyond what adaptation can alone manage. Transparency and accountability and regular reviews of the NCQG are fundamental to ensure that it meets the evolving needs of our resilient infrastructure. For instance, roads, wharves, jetties, causeways, and our airfields. Inclusive participation at all levels is essential to amplify the voices of those on the forefront lines of this crisis. Our struggle is not only solely for survival, it also for the preservation of our culture, our future generations. The scientific consensus is very clear. Limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius is vital. We call upon developed nations to lead in mobilizing public funds to integrate public finance. We emphasize the need to integrate indigenous knowledge, which have long fortified our resilience, to be respected and reflected in financial reviews and frameworks. Let us commit to climate finance and climate justice, innovation, and the respect of indigenous wisdom. The time to act is now for our planet and all its people. In closing, I offer our Kiribati traditional blessing, the Mauritiroi de Tabumoa, Yoran Kapene, meaning good health, peace, and prosperity be with us all, now and always. Kamdaba, thank you, and Salahum.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome His Excellency Mr. Kembe Andre Okulula Bahu, Ambassador of Benin to the Republic of Azerbaijan. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Merci bien, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegation, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, I would like, first of all, to convey to the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, Mr. Ilham Aliyev, and his government, and the fraternal people of Azerbaijan, the gratitude of the President of the Republic of Benin, His Excellency Patrice Talon, Head of State and Head of Government, for the outstanding organization of this important event, and also for the quality of the welcome and the wonderful working conditions made available to the participants. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this current encounter is for us an opportunity to focus our efforts on the content to be given to the first global stocktake and the new collective quantified goal on climate finance, as well as adaptation, energy transition, and solidarity between the countries of the North and the countries of the South. It is my wish that we will see the continuation of the collective surge and political drive which have made it possible to make major progress in the implementation of the decisions of previous COPs, so that the discussions at Cop29 in Baku may end successfully. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the 6th assessment report of the IPCC demonstrated to the international community the path which has to be followed for our planet to have a future. This report has confirmed that most of our African countries are facing a colossal challenge which calls for a collective paradigm shift, subsidizing the energy needs of our populations that are expanding rapidly demographically, and guaranteeing food security at the same time. We have to undertake decarbonization of our economies and adapt to the consequences of climate change. It is in this context that Benin, having developed its strategy for a low-carbon development, which incidentally is being reviewed, has established the Benin Council for Sustainable Development, which is chaired in person by the head of state. This Sustainable Development Council is a strategic body for regulation and monitoring for sober carbon development. And indeed, we have revised upwards our NDC, which is currently being worked out, in order to demonstrate our good faith and our commitment to humanity as a whole in respect of effective implementation of the Paris Agreement. Benin, with the creation of the Carbon Project Registration Authority to monitor and ensure good governance of all carbon projects launched within our borders, whether they come from national initiatives or external projects, has made a decisive step in this direction. My country, Benin, is taking every possible step nationally and is resolutely endorsing initiatives internationally to rise to all the challenges and to contribute to mobilizing defining investment to guarantee true transformation structurally of its economy. Africa must establish a robust platform for the carbon market transactions for its development and to attract innovative private funding. Ultimately, the issue at stake is the success of these negotiations, which must mean effective climate justice, which repairs the damage inflicted on Africa. And I would like to call on all stakeholders in the Convention to demonstrate understanding and to give up positions which might lead to counterproductive inflexibility. Long live international cooperation. Thank you.
It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Yang Chol Ju, Consular Permanent Mission of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea to the United Nations Office and other international organizations. You have the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, Madam President. On behalf of the delegation of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, I would like to congratulate Mr. Mukhtar Babayev on his appointment as President of Cop29, and I would look forward to fruitful outcome of the conference under his able leadership. I would also like to extend my gratitude to Executive Secretary and the Secretariat of the UNFCCC, as well as to the government of Azerbaijan for their sincere efforts to ensure success of this conference. Madam President, COP is held every year to discuss measures to respond to climate change amid global attention with hope and high expectations. But regrettably, all that comes out of the conference are empty promises and fancy words. As reported by the UN Emergency Appeal in July, thousands of people lost their lives this summer due to rising temperature, and hundreds of millions suffered from direct or indirect impact of hurricane, high temperature, drought, and torrential rain. Climate change is undoubtedly a tragic result of unbridled greed of the West, and its direct and greatest victims are none other than innocent developing countries. Under the Paris Agreement, developed countries are committed to provide $100 billion annually to developing countries. And this issue has been a core agenda at COP session every year. However, the West failed to deliver its promise. It has been over 30 years since UNFCCC was adopted on a scientific basis and entered into force, but some state parties still insist that the climate change is a fiction invented to ruin their luxurious life and economy. And they even talk about withdrawing from the convention. These countries should abandon their narrow-minded and selfish attitude of turning a blind eye to the reality of climate crisis. The recent unprecedented flood in Spain is a clear example demonstrating that even Western countries are not safe from the impact of the climate change. The United Nations and the Secretariat of UNFCCC should speed up establishing practical and institutional mechanisms to implement Paris agreements, such as matters related to loss and damage fund, and actively promote global climate change action. Madam President, under the wise leadership of Kim Jong-un, President of the State Affairs of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, our country set it as an important task to firmly protect the national security, lives and property of its people from challenges of nature caused by climate change, and enhance the national capacity to actively cope with various national disasters. To this end, we are pushing ahead with nationwide activities. Even during the period when the world was undergoing a difficult time due to the pandemic, the DPRK continuously waged forest restoration campaign, planting nearly 1.167 billion trees between 2020 and 2022. And we are carrying out a plan to increase urban green coverage to 60% by 2030. Efforts are directed to national level to increase renewable energy production such as wind, tidal and solar power. In addition, we formulated a mid and long-term green growth plan that sets out future goals and ways to achieve it for the transition of domestic economy to a green economy in the near future, and material and technological preparations for its implementation is underway. Madam President, the government of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea will continue to fulfill its responsibility and further strengthen regional and international cooperation in combating climate change. I thank you.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Kevin Macron, Climate Ambassador for France. You have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen ministers, ladies and gentlemen ambassadors, Executive Secretary, ladies and gentlemen, we all know that collectively we are not on the right track to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, whose 10th anniversary we will mark next year. On the contrary, 2024 will be the hottest ever recorded, and we are heading towards a 3-degree increase in temperature by the end of the century if we do not resolutely embark upon a trajectory which involves very short-term reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. The measures to be taken are well known, and they were broken down in the global stocktake in Dubai. A phased transition away from fossil fuels, tripling of renewable energies and doubling of energy efficiency by 2030 in particular. Now is the time for implementing these objectives with resolve and courage so that we finally enter the economy of the 21st century, decarbonized, respectful of the environment and compatible with keeping climate warming below 1.5 degrees. The follow-up to the global stocktake is also an essential element for climate ambition, which should be reflected at this COP. The next NDC cycle, the nationally determined contribution cycle, must also raise the ambition to be commensurate with the challenges while covering all greenhouse gases and economic sectors. Furthermore, France advocates an exit from fossil fuels which is planned nationally so that it is fair, orderly and equitable. We are resolutely committed to this path with the establishment of a clear and tight national strategy exiting from carbon by 2027, or as of 2027, from oil in 2045 and gas in 2050. We wish to step up the share of nuclear energy as provided for in the UAE consensus. We understand the development needs expressed by many countries here, but let us keep in mind that these needs may be covered by renewable energies, which are already more competitive, rather than with the energies of the past. However, we are conscious that the road towards this ambition also means an agreement on the NCQG. France indeed recognizes the considerable needs of the developing states and hopes that an ambitious and realistic agreement may be found before the end of this week in Baku. We are, of course, determined to increase our public funding for climate, but we cannot meet all needs other than by also calling on other sources of funding, including the most innovative ones. It's in the interest of all to demonstrate flexibility without preconditions, to accept new private resources of a large scale, and to raise resources from international taxation. We also feel that the contributor base must be enlarged by reflecting the evolution in emissions and wealth since 1992, by incorporating major emitters with a large contributive capacity without this implying a change in their legal status. I recall that France is doing all it is for climate finance, and it has substantially exceeded the commitments of the President of the Republic with 7.6 billion euros in 2022, 7.2 billion in 2023. It is devoting a third of its effort to adaptation, that's 2.6 billion euros, and that is thus 10% of international climate finance dedicated to that major challenge. France, therefore, tangibly is committing itself to ensure that no country has to choose between combating climate change and combating poverty, in accordance with the Paris Pact for People and the Planet. In this context, we can work together to accelerate the reform of the international financial architecture and direct flows towards the geographical areas who most need them. Ladies and gentlemen, the results of the first week of Cop29 are disappointing and troubling. No progress has been made on most of the key issues, and we now have longer and more complex texts, which will make decision-making even more difficult. France thus regrets that negotiations on gender and just transition have not borne fruit in the first week. We also regret that discussions on mitigation have not been addressed, and when the substantive issues have not been addressed, even though it's only a case at present of discussing the means of attaining objectives. And so, for COP29 to be progress and not regression, we must take full stock of the challenges behind these texts and negotiations this week. That implies raising ourselves to the expectations of populations who are awaiting solutions from us to the dramatic consequences of climate change, which each day are destroying even more of our forests, oceans and houses, and making living conditions on Earth more vulnerable. Given the scale of this task, we count on everyone's responsibility and spirit of compromise to overcome the deadlocks at present in the coming days, which will be crucial for the future of our action. Let us rediscover the spirit of the Paris Agreement and build on what brings us together, not divides us. Effective multilateralism must prevail, and it means that we have to rise above futile posturing to find together the parameters of a good agreement for the peoples and the planet.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Catherine Stewart, Ambassador for Climate Change for Canada. You have the floor.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, bon après-midi. I am pleased to deliver this statement on behalf of Canada's Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Stephen Guilbeault. I would like to begin by citing a word of wisdom from an old Haudenosaunee proverb. In our every deliberation, we must consider the impact of our decisions on the next 7 generations. I raise these words to remind us that we are not just fighting for today, or even for tomorrow, but for a livable planet for those who will come long after us. The decisions we make and the actions we take today, now, matter more than we will know. This is the critical decade. Humanity is shattering climate change records every year, records we should not celebrate breaking. Together, we must seize this moment for real action. Canada comes at COP28 as a ready partner. We fully understand the importance and urgency of collective climate action. In addition to helping drive needed international efforts, such as the tripling of renewables and protecting 30% of lands and waters by 2030, Canada is also taking bold domestic actions to ensure we are building a strong future with abundant clean energy and healthy ecosystems. But to do this, we must unlock unprecedented levels of finance from all sources. Canada is working towards a transformative, new collective, quantified goal for climate finance to take us through the next decade and to support those most affected by the climate crisis, in particular LDC and SIDS. A goal anchored by public support that includes private sector mobilized and acknowledges efforts from other contributors. A goal that supports accessible investments that help communities adapt to climate change and promotes debt reform. Collectively, we must mobilize trillions, and this is our opportunity. That is what Canada is hearing from our partners. Developing nations, in particular SIDS and LDCs, are telling us what they need to make this work. They're telling us they need more finance, better access to funds, and reduced debt burden. That's one reason why Canada announced at the beginning of COP29, Gaia, a public and private finance initiative where 70% of projects will support adaptation. That's why we helped launch the Climate Finance Action Network at COP26, and why Canada is working with partners to advance the Bridgetown Initiative. Excellencies, communities back home expect that COP29 will underscore and advance mitigation action while providing support to those who need it most. All major economies, including Canada, must do more to keep 1.5-degree target within reach. We need our next NDCs to be ambitious and economy-wide. We urgently need to implement mitigation actions, including those agreed at COP28 and the global stocktake. For Canada, this includes phasing out coal, scaling up renewables, slashing methane emissions, pricing pollution, and putting in place a strong framework to reduce emissions while spurring innovation and economic growth for industries and sectors with high mitigation potential. Our oil and gas pollution cap and methane regulations aim to do just that. This directly responds to the COP28 GST outcomes. Nous collaborons avec des pays et des partenaires.
We collaborate with our partners and countries around the world to accelerate the global effort towards a clean economy to conserve and protect our environment for future generations. And we do so in a way that respects and protects human rights, the rights of persons, the rights of workers, the rights of our indigenous peoples, while promoting a just, inclusive, intergenerational approach that also protects the rights of women. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution are interlinked, and they're not confined by national borders. The choices we make here at COP29 will define what lies ahead for the many generations to come. Let us be on the right side of history and build a safer, more secure, and healthier planet for all. Thank you.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome Ms. Thureya Said Al-Saaria, Assistant Director General of Nature Conservation of Oman. You have the floor.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Ladies and gentlemen, God's blessings, peace and blessings upon all of you. I would like to start off by thanking the government of the Republic of Azerbaijan for their excellent organization and hosting. We would like to thank them for all the services that they have availed by the government and the presidency of the conference in terms of services to ensure the excellent conduct of the conference activities, particularly the negotiation tracks. I would like to stand before you today to represent the Sultanate of Oman, a state that has always been keen to address the challenges of climate change. We believe that we have to understand the urgent need to finance the special efforts to counter climate change and to promote all action to ensure a resilient and sustainable planet for all. The Sultanate of Oman supports all international efforts to counter global warming. And in order to promote climate action, His Majesty Sultan Haytham bin Tariq, the Sultan of Oman, may God preserve his soul, has adopted a group of national strategies and plans such as 2040 Vision of Oman, the National Strategy for Order Transition towards Carbon Neutrality by 2050, the National Strategy for the Protection of the Environment, the National Strategy for the Adaptation with the Climate Change. In addition to all this, the Sultanate of Oman has announced that a framework has been adopted for the issuance and registration of decarbonization certificates and a structure to attract green investments. Ladies and gentlemen, as you all know, that the current standards of climate change finance are not enough in comparison to the size of the current challenges, and we need to improve the ambitions when it comes to mitigation of greenhouse effects and emissions, and there is a need to inject more needs to increase the opportunities of developing countries accessing conciliatory terms of funds, and that there should be enough funds, international funds for developing countries, including Oman, to implement strategies of adaptation. In order to address climate justice, we need to work on the common but differentiated responsibilities principle included in the UNFCCC. This requires that all parties should cooperate, and that those parties who have contributed more to the greenhouse emissions should bear more responsibility. In spite of the fact that mitigation is important in its own right, we have to remember that climate change have devastating consequences and effects that requires adaptation as well, and building capabilities and resilience to counter inevitable changes of climate change that impact millions of people around the world and wreak havoc to the communities and infrastructure, which means that funding adaptation or financing adaptation is a need. It's an urgent need. It's not a choice. Transfer of technology and building capacities are also crucial to address climate change. Developing countries need clean technology and expertise related thereto. We need to bolster international cooperation to facilitate the transfer of technology and exchange of knowledge. Developed countries should support capacity building initiatives in order to enable developing countries to shoulder the responsibilities when it comes to climate action. As we all know that wars lead to ecocide and lead to the usurpation of all resources. This means that we should counter all our efforts to cooperate to stop these wars, to redirect resources towards sustainable and sustainability projects in order to enable us to work on climate action. Building peace builds sustainable development, builds a world that is more capable of addressing climate change and climate crises. The Sultanate of Oman has always been known for its efforts for spreading international peace. And that's why we call for the stopping of all wars in the world, particularly that launched by Israel on the Gaza Strip and Lebanon, and for Israel to stop its genocide against the Palestinian people. Thank you.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Suleiman Charatonga, Additional Secretary, Environment Development, Ministry of Environment of Sri Lanka. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor and privilege for me to deliver this statement on behalf of the government of Sri Lanka. At the outset, Sri Lanka extends its sincere appreciation and congratulations to the government and the people of Azerbaijan for successful hosting of Cop29 in this beautiful city, Baku, and their generous hospitality and warm reception. In the face of escalating climate impact, Sri Lanka stands at a critical juncture where concerted and strategic actions are imperative to safeguard its environment, economy, and the society. As a nation vulnerable to the adverse effect of climate change, including extreme weather events, shifts of precipitation patterns, and sea level rise, Sri Lanka recognizes the urgency of addressing climate change. Climate action at all levels is crucial to prevent the exacerbation of climate impacts and ensure the global efforts to limit the rise of the average temperature in this century to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The vulnerable developing countries are disproportionately impacted due to lower adaptive capacity owing to frequent climate disasters, poverty, food insecurity, debt, and lack of means of implementation for climate action. Even though Sri Lanka's cumulative GHG contribution is negligible at global scale, the country is severely impacted by the adverse impact of climate change. Madam President, in this context, similar to other developing nations, we are also facing challenges ranging from limited financial and technological capacity to lack of adequate climate investments. Madam President, allow me to draw your kind attention to the obligation of the UNFCCC, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement. These international agreements serve as powerful expressions of our collective determinations to confront the imminent threat of climate change. They call upon all nations to fully implement the agreed upon measures. Sri Lanka has embarked on several transformative pathways. Our national policy on climate change was adapted in the last year, aligning with global development, country obligations, and national priorities. Further, Sri Lanka has developed the Carbon Net Zero 2050 Roadmap and Strategic Plan, which is the long-term, low-emission strategy to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. We will submit the post-biennial transparency report, keeping in line with Article 13 of the Paris Agreement to fulfill Sri Lanka's transparency engagement. As a contribution toward global commitments, Sri Lanka will present the progressive and ambitious NDC 3 by the deadline. Sri Lanka has embarked in updating its national adaptation plan in line with the iterative adaptation cycle, recognizing the need to enhance actions and support for adaptation. Madam President, Cop29 is the implementation COP. In order to implement climate actions, finance, technology development and transfer, and capacity building supports are very vital for a country like Sri Lanka. At this COP, we have a unique opportunity to uphold the expectations of the current generation who depend on us to set the standard for climate sustainability and to fulfill our duty as steward of the next generation. Given the current trajectory, there may never be a greater opportunity or a more favorable moment. Let us not wait to do it tomorrow. Let us embark on climate action now. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Excellencies, colleagues, I am reminded that we need to adhere to the time due to the fact that the interpreters are working really hard to ensure that your message is well received. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Karma Tasharing, Secretary, Ministry of Energy and Natural Resources of Bhutan. You have the floor.
Madam President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I bring warm greetings of His Majesty King Jigme and the people of Bhutan. As we gather in this historical city of Baku, it is a profound honor and privilege for Bhutan and for me personally to address this distinguished high-level segment of COP29. At the outset, I would like to thank the government of Azerbaijan for hosting the COP29 and for the warm hospitality extended to Bhutanese delegation. I stand here representing a land deep in the Himalayas where reverence for nature is woven into the very fabric of our existence. Bhutan has long embraced the path of environmental stewardship, a commitment deeply rooted in our development philosophy of gross national happiness. Under the dynamic leadership of our kings, Bhutan has always demonstrated global leadership in environmental protection and conservation. We are amongst the first countries to pledge to remain carbon neutral, and we are strongly committed to delivering sustainable development goals too. However, as confirmed by the latest IPCC and other reports, the slightest temperature rise will have detrimental effects on high mountain glaciers and cryosphere regions like Bhutan. For our mountains and its ecosystems, even a 1 degree centigrade rise would be detrimental. We are already witnessing and bearing the brunt of climate change despite our minimal contribution to it. Bhutan graduated from the LDC category in December last year. However, this development milestone has not diminished our vulnerability to the adverse impacts of climate change. Neither has it increased our capacity to address climate change. According to our constitution, we are mandated to maintain a minimum of 60% of total land cover under forests for all times to come, and our current forest cover stands at 70%. Our forests, pristine and vast, are a vital carbon sink, absorbing millions of tons of carbon dioxide each year. We are proud to be the first carbon-negative country in the world, a distinction earned through our unwavering dedication to sustainable practices. However, our commitment to carbon neutrality and maintaining 60% forest cover are at risk due to global warming and increased incidences of forest fires. Bhutan came to COP29 with high hopes. COP29 should deliver on the NCQG that clearly articulates the growing needs of developing countries. The quantum required runs into trillions of dollars within the context of higher ambition. We have heard in the negotiation rooms that the goal needs to be new, additional, and easily accessible and be grant-based for adaptation, and loss and damage, and highly concessional for mitigation. Grant-based climate finance is important for Bhutan to be able to adapt and build resilience to climate change and support our ongoing transformation efforts. Under your leadership, Bhutan remains hopeful that the climate finance goal will be adequately delivered because, as a developing country, we rely heavily on climate finance to implement adaptation and mitigation measures. In a significant step towards building global momentum for a net zero, climate resilient and nature positive future, Bhutan, along with Madagascar, Panama, and Suriname, as carbon negative or carbon neutral countries, launched the Net Zero Forum at this COP. The forum recognizes and commits scaling ambition and pledges to remain carbon neutral for all times. And we call upon the world to deliver an ambitious means of implementation support to reduce emissions by 2035 in line with the 1.5 degree centigrade pathway and mitigate the triple planetary crisis. Last but not the least, to deliver on our collective long-term goals of the Paris Agreement, We must work towards a successful outcome at Baku. This will be a defining moment for global collaboration to achieve carbon neutrality and climate resilience and foster a new era of global cooperation and innovation. Let us unite to build a sustainable future for all of us. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Ali Mohammed, Special Climate Envoy of the President of Kenya and Chairperson of the African Group, speaking on behalf of the African Group. Your Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Excellencies, Kenya delivers this statement on behalf of the African Group. Africa stands here today as a continent disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change, yet one that contributes the least to the global emissions causing this crisis. Last year, at the Africa Climate Summit in Nairobi, Africa called out the fact that we had broken records we cannot afford to break. The hottest year on record, the driest year on record, in the same place, the wettest year in some other parts. This year, we have continued that dangerous streak with again the hottest summer on record globally and devastating floods, cyclones, wildfires, droughts across the world, from Sahel to Southern Africa, from Spain to China, from India to the US, and from Malawi to the Caribbean. At the African Climate Summit, Africa promoted climate action as opportunity. We talked about climate positive growth, how Africa can be part of the climate solution and realize inclusive economic growth by doing so. Several $1 billion of investment and support were committed at the inaugural Africa Climate Summit last year in Nairobi. Kenya, for example, is advancing production and deployment of electric motorcycles and buses, as well as direct air capture projects, as home to the first Africa direct air capture company. Similar initiatives abound in different parts of Africa as the continent moves forward with ambitious green industrial programs. Yet, we must be honest to ourselves. A big part of that progress is happening despite direct inputs from the UN climate process. Africa is making all efforts to contribute to enhancing resilience and choose a low carbon growth trajectory. However, despite all the ambition of Africa, it is not possible to avoid a global climate catastrophe without commitment, without support, and without solidarity by all countries. The road ahead requires finance. We all know that full well, and yet more money flows out of Africa, largely for debt service payment than into Africa, and our debt burden continues to rise. Our cost of capital is around 5 to 8 times higher compared to most developed countries because of limited fiscal space, the price of capital, and unequal risk perception. It is hard, if not impossible, to turn Africa's intrinsic potential into action. This is why we turn to the task here at Cop29, our negotiations on international cooperation. Here in Baku, we need a clear outcome on NCQG, New Collective Quantified Goal, or new finance goal with a bold new commitment of public finance contributions, one that is proof that we take climate action and climate change seriously. Simply put, the 100 billion goal or similar will not be good enough. Developing countries, including Africa, are calling for a mobilization target of $1.3 trillion per year, underpinned by public finance provision goal of 600 billion per year for grant and concessional finance. Let us not be paralyzed by business as usual approaches to finance. The numbers are big, but we all know the money is there. We know public finance can be mobilized, and that it will never be as cheap to avert a climate catastrophe as it is today. And we know that many people all over the world, most of all our young generations, are disappointed in us, their leaders. But unless we change, they will never trust us. We must act now, decisively, collectively. Our future depends on it, and our future will flourish if we do so. As the chair of the African Group of Climate Change Negotiators, I urge developed country parties to approach the NCUKG negotiations with a spirit of ambition, equity, and solidarity. We need a course correct on finance if we are to deliver the aims of Paris Agreement and the COP28 UAE consensus. Let us leave COP29 with a robust, inclusive, and ambitious finance goal that delivers for the people and the planet alike. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Joseph Emmanuel Felipe, General Director of the Ministry of Environment of Haiti. You have the floor.
Madam
Chair, Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I take the floor on behalf of the Environment Minister, His Excellency Moise Jr. Jean-Pierre, who regrettably is unable to attend. I'm Leader Edouard, the Director General of our agency. On behalf of the Transitional Presidential Council of Haiti, currently led by His Excellency Leslie Voltaire, and on behalf of the Head of Government and the people of the Republic of Haiti, I wish first of all to express our deep gratitude to the people and government of Azerbaijan for the warm welcome and remarkable organization of this COP29, which is being commonly called the financing COP. For Haiti, the 1.5-degree limit in the increase of global temperature is a question of survival. The impacts of climate change are already a harsh reality for our country. We can mention, for example, the displacement of more than 100,000 Haitian men and women following the disastrous flooding in 2023. Secondly, the rise in sea level affecting the islets of Haiti. And thirdly, more recently, the major flooding caused by the passage of a tropical depression over the country. These crises graphically illustrate the extreme vulnerability of the small island developing states in the face of this climate emergency, to which they have contributed only 0.003% of global emissions. Notwithstanding these challenges, Haiti continues to play an active role through its contribution in combating climate change. Among other commitments in the revised and updated document entitled the Nationally Determined Contribution, we could in particular mention, firstly, increasing forest cover significantly to capture carbon and thus restore degraded land. Secondly, promoting renewable energies as an alternative to fossil fuel energy, counting, for example, by way of solutions on solar energy and wind energy. Thirdly, strengthening climate resilience, thanks to our first national adaptation plan, which, following a highly participatory and inclusive process, identified priority actions in essential sectors such as agriculture, water, healthcare, and infrastructure. Madam Chair, for these ambitions to become a reality, Haiti needs financial, human, and technological resources equal to the challenges posed by climate change. In this regard, we call, first of all, for rapid and adequate capitalization of the Loss and Damage Fund. Secondly, effective doubling of funding for adaptation by 2025. And thirdly, commitments to align all this climate finance with the 1.5 degree Celsius goal in order to guarantee a just and inclusive transition. Haiti commends the attention paid to these priorities and strongly encourages tangible results to strengthen international solidarity and to demonstrate that climate multilateralism can work. Madam Chair, Haiti hopes that this conference will be a decisive turning point with, firstly, a sound framework to assess progress and strengthen the adaptation ambition, thirdly, a second just transition, and thirdly, an ambitious decision concerning a new collective quantified goal based on the real needs of the most vulnerable countries and accompanied by a robust transparency framework to ensure respect for the commitments undertaken. Madam Chair, the Haitian government approves the approach of the Cop29 presidency, demonstrating a resolve to advocate for an inclusive process and have a dialogue with a broad array of international stakeholders with a view to finding shared solutions to the multiple challenges facing the international community. And it also restates its support for the approach for affording the possibility of the Republic of Taiwan to contribute to the Convention and the Paris Agreement. We also wish to see professional and pragmatic participation and constructive participation of Taiwan at this 29th Conference of the Parties, as well as those to come, so that we can strengthen contributions to resolving climate change and moving towards a greener, more neutral world. Let us act quickly, well, and above all, together in order to restore confidence in climate multilateralism and guarantee a safe and sustainable future for each and every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you. I understand that there is a request for a right of reply. In accordance with established practice, the right of reply will be given at the end of the list of speakers from parties. The party requesting a right of reply will be given 3 minutes, and the party in respect of whom the right of reply was requested will be given 1 minute after that. No further opportunity for reply will be allocated. Delegates are kindly requested to respect the time allotted for their interventions. On behalf of the conference, I would like to thank all of you for your statements. Distinguished delegates, we have now concluded the delivery of national statements. I will now give the floor to China for a right of reply. China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Distinguished President, China has noted that in the course of this conference, a few countries, in total disregard of the fact that Taiwan is an alienable part of the Chinese territory, have made much noises about the participation of Taiwan at the COPs of the UNFCCC. This is absolutely not acceptable. There is only one China in the world, and only one legitimate government to represent it, the government of the People's Republic of China. Taiwan is an alienable part of the Chinese territory. The One China principle is an universal consensus of the international community and a basic rule governing international relations. Since 1971, the adoption of Resolution 2758 at the 26th UNGA, it has resolved politically, legally, and procedurally, and once for all, the issue of representation of China, including Taiwan, at the UN. Any questions on the participation of Taiwan region in activities of international organizations must be addressed under the One China principle. The Chinese region of Taiwan has no ground, no reason or right to take part in the UN or other international organizations or international treaties that are only open to sovereign states. The UNFCCC is no exception. The Chinese government encourages local governments, private sector, and all strata of society to contribute to climate response and has made both efforts and arrangements to this end. In reality, the Taiwan region can definitely use the existing arrangement to contribute to the global climate action. Madam President, here at Baku, the conference is dealing with heavy tasks and a heavy agenda. We therefore do hope that related countries keep their focus on negotiations and strictly abide by the One China principle in order to jointly work towards a positive outcome of the conference. We should refrain from deviating the meeting agenda with external elements which can only disturb and hinder the progress of the conference. China requests officially to put on the record this statement. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, China. I understand that there is another request for a right of reply. I will now give the floor to Russia for a right of reply. Russia, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, the Russian Federation has requested a right to reply in the light of this statement of the delegation of Ukraine. We would like to point out that it's extremely strange to hear accusations from the representative of a country which is systematically violating international law and has been doing so, including on the territory of Russia. The damage caused by Russian fighters to the environment and global climate still has to be calculated. For our part, we would like to stress that the Russian Federation is committed to its obligations in accordance with the Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement, including the provision of national reporting covering all the sovereign territories of the country in accordance with the Constitution of the Russian Federation. Thank you.
Thank you, Russia. In respect of whom the right of reply was requested, I will give 1 minute to Ukraine should it wish to respond. Delegates, we will hear statements from observers today at 1500 in this plenary. With this, I declare this joint meeting of the COP, CMP, and CMA adjourned. Thank you.
Nicholas, we'll see you again.
Yes.